Support for Connecticut East this week comes from Lyman Allen Art Museum, now on view, mixed media works by Puerto Rican artist Emna Arroyo, whose art explores connections between the African continent and its diaspora in an ongoing endeavor to reclaim a scattered heritage. More at lymanallen.org. Newport Mansions, now offering a limited guide-led experience of the third floor of the Breakers Mansion. Never-before-seen private bedrooms, bathrooms and recreational spaces used by the Vanderbilt family and household staff for more than a century. Tickets and information at newportmansions.org. Alliance for Living, the only HIV/AIDS service organisation and resource centre in southeastern Connecticut. It also deals with homelessness and assists people dealing with substance use disorder. Learn more, including working with us, at allianceforliving.org. SCAD, the Southeastern Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, is offering a $3,500 sign-on bonus for licensed clinicians. Go to licensedclinicians.org to learn more. That's licensedclinicians.org. And Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling, here to help individuals and families affected by gambling-related harm. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit our website at ccpg.org. She was one of the original Coast Guard whistleblowers back in 2014. 10 years on, and Dr. Kim McLear is still fighting for justice for her and every other Coast Guard assault victim. Plus, we take a look at other stories making the headlines from around the region. This is Connecticut East This Week. Hello, I'm Brian Scott Smith. In 2023, the news organization CNN uncovered a report by the U.S. Coast Guard looking at historic sexual assault and misconduct in the agency over a number of years, called Operation Fouled Anchor. So damning were the findings of that report, the leadership of the Coast Guard buried the report from Congress and the public. But since it went public, more and more whistleblowers have come forward to tell their stories of sexual harassment and assault, bullying, racial discrimination, and more. Today, there are multiple federal investigations being undertaken into this report and other reports, some of which were also buried by the Coast Guard. Dr. Kim McLear is one of the many victims who suffered as a result of these unspeakable and illegal behaviors at the Coast Guard, and she first brought this to the Coast Guard leadership's attention back in 2014. And when she got nowhere with that, she went to Congress in 2015, the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security in 2016, and then to the Office of the Inspector General in 2017. Now, 10 years on in 2024, and Dr. McLear has formed a coalition of organizations who are helping to tell even more stories about how victims suffered while serving in the U.S. Coast Guard, in the hopes that finally actions will be taken and those who covered up or perpetrated the crimes will be brought to justice and victims provided with care for the emotional and physical damage that has been inflicted upon them. Here is Dr. Kim McLear's story.
I served 20 years in the Coast Guard. I retired last year as a senior military officer at the rank of Commander 05. And the last 10 years of my career, I've been a very vocal and public whistleblower, both using the internal processes to file various complaints and also using processes such as the Inspector General through Homeland Security and also through Congress. You're right, obviously, none of these types of atrocious behavior should happen to anybody. I've endured over the arc of my career sexual assault, sexual harassment, racism, bullying, discrimination, and obviously retaliation for speaking up, saying that these are behaviors that should never be tolerated. One of the reasons why I continue to speak up about it is because the Coast Guard in particular, yes, they're military, yes, they're law enforcement, but they also have a more humanitarian focus mission. And with the Coast Guard being one of the smallest military branches out of 6, it's just really unacceptable that they have this kind of life-saving, altruistic kind of values that are baked in, but for thousands of people that couldn't be further from the truth. So, what people see in movies and different news stories about helicopters, going into these storms and disasters and rescuing people. That is one of the operations. But from a cultural perspective, there are people within the organization, federal civilians, reservists, active duty, and so forth, that are literally drowning. And so the service culture, they don't have a culture where they recognize this urgency to save people from a horrendously toxic and abusive workplace. So for me, I see it as I'm really just holding up a mirror back to them, back to their own values, to say, if we put on a uniform and we take an oath to serve, then that means that we need to have the ethics, the courage to do exactly that. We shouldn't be beholden or loyal to an institution or loyal to an individual who happens to be in charge. We have to be loyal to the Constitution. We have to be loyal to laws. We have to be loyal to policies. So that's really what I have done all of these years, is using my voice to advocate for the Coast Guard to be what it claims to be already on paper, which is a culture free from harassment, discrimination, and so forth. So that doesn't exactly, get you invited to the company picnic when you speak up. But I think you can assess a culture of the Coast Guard, and this is applicable elsewhere as well, but you can assess the culture based upon how folks treat you when you are holding that mirror up. And if folks don't like what they see in the mirror, I think that says more about where the problems lie. So all I've really have done as a whistleblower, I don't mean to minimize it, but in essence, what I'm doing is I'm reminding people to look in the mirror and ask people a very basic question. Are these the values that you have? And if you're acting out of alignment and people are suffering and laws are being violated, what are you going to do about it? Because we can all see. And to date, the answer is overwhelmingly has been inaction, arrogance, and apathy.
I'm sure you've been following Admiral Fagan's various testimonies that she's been giving at committee, subcommittee. Obviously, the one that's sort of dominating everything at the moment, which of course is Operation Fouled Anchor, which is getting quite a lot of press coverage, and how she is reacting to it as the top leader of the Coast Guard. It's coming across as uncaring, and yes, she seems to be hiding behind the Inspector General, and it doesn't seem that she's being a leader in any sense of the word at all.
Yes, I think she should resign. I think she should. I think that there comes a point when we know what is right, we know what's wrong. And the reason why we know what's right and we know what's wrong is because we have laws. And where the laws fall short, we have policies. The Coast Guard policies say step by step how investigations should be handled, how they should be adjudicated. We have the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And again, you have federal laws. It is against the law to commit sexual crimes. It is against the law to retaliate against anybody who comes forward. If you speak up and you say you were bullied, or you speak up and you say you were assaulted, and your supervisor gives you a lower performance evaluation, that's against the law. That's retaliation. So I guess what I'm saying is policies and the laws take the guesswork out. And once you have knowledge that laws were violated, policies were violated, and obviously people are harmed in the process of that, you have a duty to make that an urgent focus to hold people accountable, period. Hold people accountable. But, I've shared with reporters before, the Coast Guard leadership, specifically Admiral Fagan and also her predecessors, Admiral Schultz, and before Admiral Schultz was Admiral Paul Zumkopf, they all have the same predictable behaviors, because how they are responding to these cover-ups is exactly the culture that so many of us are outraged by. This kind of lackadaisical, uncaring, apathetic. If someone has that high degree of apathy when they know that people are suffering, and they know people are suffering because policies and laws have been violated, but they're not expressing any type of urgency, then it's not a surprise that people aren't being held accountable. Apathy and accountability usually don't go together. So I think what people are seeing publicly, and more so now, is the actual culture on full display. And this is with pressure by NPR, Fortune, Time, AP, CNN, Congress, the IG. The Coast Guard has never, in its 100+ year history, the Coast Guard has never been under more pressure than they are under right now. And this is still the level of apathy that they have. So imagine if you are a young service member or young federal civilian and you're being bullied and harassed, the level of apathy and inaction that's occurring when there aren't this amount of spotlights and attention on those cases. So what we're seeing is the actual culture on full display. Is it doesn't matter if you're harmed, raped, assaulted, bullied, discriminated against. Oh well, that is the culture. And that is why so many people have suffered. And that is why so many perpetrators have been promoted and risen up through the ranks. And then those perpetrators, reinforce a cycle, because now those are the people who are quote unquote overseeing investigations, which in other words means covering up investigations. So that's how you end up with this churn. Good ethical people pushed out and perpetrators pushed up. That's how you end up with several folks with a lot of stars on their shoulders having a very apathetic personality.
Talk to us as well about Secretary Mayorkas, because he is the boss,
yes,
obviously, of Admiral Fagan. Nothing really has come out of his office at all. To the best of my knowledge, I think he's said very little, certainly about the latest situation, Operation Fouled Anchor. And bearing in mind that the subcommittees that are investigating this are struggling, one, to get documentation out of the Coast Guard, which is astounding. And then when they do get it, it is so heavily redacted, and I'm sure you've seen plenty of this, that it's almost effectively worthless. It's just a black piece of paper. What are your thoughts on that situation? Because again, there clearly is no support coming from that office either.
Yes. And again, what we're seeing now, we've seen before. So the Senate has already criticized Admiral Fagan for, obstructing their investigations by not being timely and cooperative with the documents. And by the time they do share it, if they do share it, 80 to 90, or if not 100% of the pages completely blacked out and redacted, which is unacceptable. They're saying things like in camera review, and, they're trying to negotiate in ways to make sure that Congress cannot actually do their oversight duties, which is obviously totally unacceptable. But we've seen this before. Back in 2019, when I testified on Capitol Hill, the House of Representatives had two full committee. It was the Oversight for Government Reform and also the House Homeland Security Committee. Two full committees did an 18-month-long investigation into all the Coast Guard's issues. Back then, the Commandant was Admiral Carl Schultz. And when I testified on Capitol Hill, I was invited as an O4, as a lieutenant commander. The head of the service, Carl Schultz, he didn't even show up that day. He not only obstructed Congress, did the same, obstruction with documents and redactions. And to add insult to injury, he didn't even show up to the hearing. So Congress had a table, they had a name tent, and he wasn't there. I guess he had more important things to do. But again, that is the culture. The culture is saying, I'm above the law, I'm above oversight, and what are you going to do about it? So the level of apathy, we've talked about the level of arrogance, that's what I'm getting at, right? It's a brazenness of, I am not accountable to you. And that is why there's so much harm that gets done, is because, especially from a victim side, when you are watching these hearings and you're reading these news reports, could you imagine what the victims are thinking? They're thinking, well, gosh, if this is how the four stars are acting to the press or acting to Congress, then we can imagine what is being said, not even behind closed doors, right? Town halls. And so going back to Secretary Mayorkas, so I was his special assistant in 2013 and 2014 when he was a deputy secretary. So even as a deputy secretary through the Obama administration, he had oversight over the Coast Guard. It's already public domain, public knowledge, but in the OIG report that was substantiated my case in December of 2018, Mayorkas' name is actually mentioned in the report. It's mentioned in the report because I actually flew from Connecticut at the Academy. I flew back to DC after I had previously worked for him. He and I maintained kind of a direct email kind of correspondence after I became a professor. And he would always kind of ask me, how are things going? Are you liking teaching? And one day I just said, I just need to level with him. So I got on a plane, went to his office, and I said, I'm actually being harassed. I'm actually being bullied. And this is all the way up. You're talking multiple admirals. I actually never knew what he did about that information until I read the OIG report. And then I realized he contacted the then Commandant Paul Zimkoff, who then contacted the Coast Guard Academy superintendent, who then retaliated against me. So I guess what I'm saying is I confided and trusted in then Deputy Secretary Mayorkas, which resulted directly in retaliation. He resigned shortly after that with the administration change. Now he comes back in. He's appointed by Biden as a secretary. So for me, a deeply personal perspective, as someone who we worked in the same office together, we rode in the same vehicles to the White House together, right? I know what he knows from the perspective of these are not new issues. Alejandro Mayorkas is not looking at Coast Guard culture as something new, as a new secretary. He already has had oversight over the Coast Guard back when he was a deputy secretary in 2013. And he knew that there were issues because I told him myself. So for me, when I look at why hasn't he come out with any public statements? He shares the same campus as Coast Guard headquarters. I don't know if folks realize that. He shares the same campus. So they moved the old Coast Guard headquarters and the old DHS headquarters. So they actually co-locate the same campus. When the secretary, he doesn't fly commercial flights. So who does he fly with? Coast Guard One aircraft. They eat together. They share the same gym. They share the same transportation. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of intimate time, right? So the only time I've heard Alejandro Mayorkas make any public statements about filed anchor. Senator Butler asked him a question at a hearing probably about 2-3 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. I had to look up the exact date. But in his response, he said that he had full and absolute confidence in Admiral Fagan, period. And the question was asked specifically about filed anchor. And that was his response. So again, there's no sense of urgency. There's no sense of outrage that this is presumably the largest cover-up of rape in probably military history. There's no sense of acknowledgement of the history of many OIG cases over the years that have been substantiated. There's no outrage and urgency around people have already lost trust and confidence in the reporting systems. So no, I think that he absolutely needs to do more to hold the Coast Guard accountable. And I think the time for making a blanket statement of you have full confidence in someone, I think is no longer needed. I think what people are looking for is very specific action. Who are the perpetrators? Identify them and hold them accountable. And perpetrators, I would also include anyone who covered up the report is also a perpetrator. Coast Guard policy already says if you do the crime or you condone the crime, you are guilty of the crime. Covering up these reports, Operation Filed Anchor, all of the obstruction in my case that I reported, which resulted in writing the ship. And then also when I appeared on CNN back in December, it was a culture respect report that Admiral Paul Zimkopt covered up. Culture respect report also showed that there was a pervasive culture of rape, sexual assault, bullying, hazing across the board. So yes, Filed Anchor is getting a lot of media attention, and it should, but we can't forget that in 2019, we also had the writing the ship investigation, and then we also had the cover-up of culture respect. So if you look at all three of those reports, they span every form of violence. And you're talking about 3 service chiefs that covered it up sequentially, and they all overlap with each other. The same people who are perpetrators, some of the same people in writing the ship, or some of the same perpetrators of both culture respect and Operation Filed Anchor. So as a secretary who certainly has more access to records than any of us do from a personnel perspective, what's lacking is the urgency. What's lacking is outrage of all the people who have been harmed, all the people who have been begging and pleading out for help. So I think that his silence is pretty loud, to be honest.
You've mentioned obviously about the 3 admirals and named them. And the other question I want to put to you is, apart from those people obviously knowing, I'm guessing that all of maybe the superintendents as well at the Coast Guard Academy, maybe station commanders as well, because the sense that we're getting, and certainly Admiral Fagan made the point that she had been sort of aware of Operation Filed Anchor, maybe possibly before 2018, but then, really once it came out with CNN, which sounds implausible, frankly.
Yes.
And it begs the question that at the very least, the superintendents of the CGA, successive superintendents, must also, and their assistants must also have been well aware of what was been going on, because surely they were part of either the investigation or directing the investigation. Talk to us about that.
So these issues are intertwined, they're pervasive, and they're systemic. So from a systemic perspective, you have the superintendents. These are 2-star admirals. You have the people below the superintendents that had, the initial kind of firsthand information about these assaults and issues that are occurring. Investigations may or may not have occurred, but they had knowledge of it. And all that information would have been shared with the Academy legal staff. It may have also intertwined with the Academy's Equal Opportunity Office. A large amount of these admirals also sit on the Board of Trustees. Admiral Fagan was a Board of Trustees member since 2016. I've had numerous conversations with her in that capacity as a faculty member, and she is a Board of Trustees member. They would make visits multiple times a year to the campus. So you're right, it is implausible. It is a polite way of saying it, but you're talking about decades of that same architecture of superintendents going back. That's a lot of landscape of people. But again, that's part of the culture, right? If this is not going to quote unquote look favorable to the brand, then suppress it and cover it up. And that is actually what is taught. That is actually the culture. So it's not shocking or surprising that from one superintendent to the next, they're just burying the bodies, right? Not to use a graphic analogy, but they're bearing their reports because that is what was taught to them. That is what was passed down. That is what was taught to them. If you want to be successful, you need to make sure that nothing that could be perceived as damaging sees the light of day. And on top of that, the more successful you are at suppressing and covering up these things, the more you will be rewarded. That is the pattern that they have used. It is a club. If you want to advance and be successful in this club, you need to make sure that nothing that is damaging to the club sees the light of day. So if you are a Black queer whistleblower or faculty member and you say, I'm being bullied and harassed, from their perspective, thinking, oh my gosh, but she's Black, she's queer. Oh my gosh, what if this gets out? It's a recipe for cover up. They didn't want to deal with the headlines. It came out anyway, right? So now you're talking about 40 years of rape. Oh my gosh, can you imagine the headlines is what they say. And we see what their handwritten notes were. Admiral Bobovich, his initials are off to the side. His initials in the report are VOJO. He's a two-star admiral, and he wrote something to the effect of, this would be catastrophic if Foul Anchor got up because of the ongoing issues, referring to me, happening at the Coast Guard Academy. And those are his notes in the fall of 2018, while I'm suffering, right, and dealing with all of the issues I'm dealing with. But they're calculating and plotting, how do we make this go away, versus putting 10 times that energy into how do we find the perpetrators and hold them accountable, because it's the perpetrators that are tarnishing the brand, but they don't see it that way. They see it as the people who are coming forward. They're the problem. So in order to get rid of the problem, get rid of the people, bring this forward. And if there's a report that validates it, get rid of that report too. So yes, we're talking about the admirals who've been superintendents. We're talking about their legal staffs. We're talking about equal opportunity. We're talking about anyone in the chain of command. That's just at the academy. Then you take that same culture. These are folks that get stationed elsewhere, right? The academy has a boss. They work for the Human Resources Directorate. And then they had a alignment change probably around 2017 or so. And then they had the Deputy Commandant of Mission Support versus now 3-star. So, but the point is that they have another directorate overseen by several other admirals that oversees the Coast Guard. 9 out of 10 of them are graduates of the Coast Guard Academy. So going back to where I started with this interview, you're talking about loyalty to an institution, loyalty to classmates, right? And they say in their indoctrination, you're forming lifelong bonds. This is the type of indoctrination that many of them are exposed to. And so naturally, if you're progressing up the ranks, you've been rewarded for suppressing anything that could tarnish your beloved institution, your beloved organization, then certainly that would be the ultimate expectation if you were the service chief, if you were the 4-star. And that's exactly what Fagan and Schultz and Zimkoff did. And I'm sure we can easily go back, but just to frame it to those 3 people, that is literally the culture. At all costs, protect the brand, which means having loyalty to each other, not loyalty to the Constitution, and not having any type of outrage about holding perpetrators accountable.
Just want to ask this final question. What message do you have to the people who will be listening to this about the Coast Guard and, what they need to do? And this isn't aimed obviously at the cadets. This is at the leadership and those who, some have come out like you, but the ones who are still there, who really need to make their voice heard if real change is going to happen.
Yeah, I think that, it's been over a year since CNN dropped the news about Foul Anchor. And in that year since, no one has been held accountable. So I think that for those people who are currently dealing with an abusive workplace where they're at, obviously encouraging those folks to utilize any type of mental health resources, make sure that their support systems are solid. If they would like to use their voice to make change, specifically systemic change, definitely would encourage people to contact the Inspector General's office, would encourage people to contact the House and the Senate, because there are several parallel investigations happening. If they so desire, it's not for everyone, but if they so desire to share their story with the press and the media, I think that's also helpful, because I think that at the end of the day, I think that the Coast Guard is a military service that serves the people. And because the Coast Guard, including Homeland Security, is failing to hold itself accountable, then the people need to hold the Coast Guard accountable, which means that more people in the public domain need to understand what is going on in the Coast Guard. And I hope that people can look at stories like myself and many others as examples of the ways that you can use your voice and still hold on to your dignity. It's a tough balance. It takes a toll, but people voluntarily chose to serve the Coast Guard. They didn't choose to be harassed or raped or assaulted. So, my organization, Right to Ship Coalition, that's what we're centered on. We're centered on justice, accountability, but we're also heavily centered on dignity. And so I hope that people can see, my coalition and other organizations as a sense of strength, as a sense of community, to say that if you have been harmed or you are being harmed, that you still have worth, you still have value, and use your voice, and stand in your own truth, and do not ever let anyone tell your story for you.
Dr. Kimberly McLear, retired commander from the US Coast Guard and founder of Right the Ship Coalition. Thank you ever so much for your time and for your comments today.
Thank you.
Connecticut East this week is made possible by the Lyman Allen Arts Museum, located just off I-95 exit 83, has enjoyed celebrating the arts with visitors for almost a century. Throughout the year, the museum presents a wide range of changing exhibitions, in addition to their permanent galleries that celebrate Connecticut art and history and the Tiffany family's ties to the area. Outside, there's sculpture trailers surrounded by 12 rolling acres of gardens and lawns. More at lymanallen.org. Alliance for Living is the only HIV/AIDS service organization and resource center in southeastern Connecticut that also deals with homelessness and assists people dealing with substance use disorder. We provide a safe and confidential environment rooted in harm reduction. We offer a wide range of care to the community, including but not limited to case management, testing, syringe service program, and medical nutrition therapy. To view a full list of our services, please visit allianceforliving.org. Newport Mansions, as seen on HBO's The Gilded Age. Newport Mansions preserves and protects 11 historic properties and landscapes in Newport, Rhode Island, exemplifying 3 centuries of achievements in American architecture, decorative arts, and landscape design. Plan your visit this year and attend some of the mansion's signature events, including Newport Mansions Wine and Food Festival, September 20th to 22nd, and holidays at the Newport Mansions, November 23rd to January 1st. Tickets and info at newportmansions.org. And
SCAD, the Southeastern Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, is looking for licensed clinicians and is offering the top benefits packages in the state. Go to licensedclinicians.org to learn more. That's licensedclinicians.org.
The Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling is a nonprofit organization which, through advocacy, prevention, and education, is here to support individuals and families who are impacted by problem gambling. Our helpline, 1-888-789-7777, is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We also have live chat and tech support through our website, www.ccpg.org.
Time now for a look at other stories making the headlines this week. Police departments in southeastern Connecticut and the eastern region will now have direct access to a nationwide forensic computer system used to investigate gun crimes called NIBIN, the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. New London Police Department have been chosen as the hub for the region and have taken delivery of a mobile forensics truck that has equipment capable of scanning bullet shell cases and seeing if the gun they were fired from has been used in other crime situations. Brian Wright is the chief of New London Police and said it's a game changer for them.
NIBIN and mobile unit is advanced technology which will significantly enhance our capabilities in investigations, particularly those weapon related. It allows us to conduct more precise and efficient forensics analysis. The new equipment will aid us in identifying of ballistic evidence, linking firearms to specific incidents and suspects with greater accuracy and speed.
Wright says the mobile unit, which is stored at the New London Police Department, is open to all law enforcement agencies in the region, and he hopes to have around 10 of his detectives trained in the use of the new mobile unit soon. The Women's Business Development Council and Connecticut's Office of Early Childhood recently announced an extension of their partnership to support and create childcare businesses in the state. Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysowitz is on the governor's childcare cabinet and said initiatives like this help provide affordable childcare, promote jobs, and support the state's economy.
Which is going to provide $6 million over the next 3 years to support the WBDC's program and their Opportunity Fund. Since 2020, this partnership and program has created 9,041 jobs and 38,108 child care slots.
Connecticut is currently dealing with a lack of childcare places across the state, which in turn is affecting employers' ability to hire people, especially women. And a 17th century replica tall ship from Delaware will be visiting Connecticut before heading to the Mystic Seaport Museum shipyard for repairs and maintenance. The Kalmar nickel made history back in 1638 when it came from Europe and started a colony in the Delaware Valley 18 years after the Mayflower brought the pilgrims from England to the northeast. Lauren Morgans is the captain of the replica ship and says it's rich in maritime history.
The original Kalmar nickel sailed from Sweden to what is now Wilmington, Delaware, for the first time in 1638. founded the colony of New Sweden. Not only modern-day Wilmington, but also Philadelphia was part of New Sweden, and across the Delaware River, parts of New Jersey that border the Delaware were also part of that colony. So it's kind of our local Mayflower story, if you want to think about it that way, in the mid-Atlantic area.
The Kalmar-Nickel will be offering sailing excursions and tours of the ship from New London from August 16th to August 18th. Details can be found at Kalmar-Nickel, that's KALMARNYCKEL.org/explore. That's all from us for this edition. Do send us your questions and story ideas to the show via our website at connecticut-east.com or Facebook or Twitter at Connecticut East and on Instagram at Connecticut East This Week. And you can listen to the show again on our social platforms, on demand, and by asking your smart speaker to play Connecticut East This Week podcast. And please like, follow, and share on your social media too. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thank you for listening.